Good afternoon. My name is Desmond Chambers, and my project's name is Creek View. Creek View is a commemorative gathering space designed to honor the history, culture, and sacrifice of those buried in unmarked graves around Prairie View. Rather than creating a traditional memorial, I wanted to design an experience that encourages remembrance, education, and reflection. Through meaningful views, carefully selected materials, and passive environmental strategies, the project creates spaces that connect visitors with both history and nature. So my design concept statement was reverence. This project embodies reverence through a commemorative gathering space that honors history, culture, and sacrifice of those buried in unmarked graves. Meaningful views, carefully selected materials, and passive design create spaces for education, reflection, and remembrance. My project began by researching the history of the unmarked graves outside of PV's campus and recognizing how those people and many others were meant to be forgotten. I wanted to create a monument that restores dignity to their stories by providing a place where people can gather, reflect, and learn about them. Instead of focusing on one loss alone, the project celebrates memory through architecture, landscape, and human connection. Site analysis played an important role in the design process. The creek became the primary organizing element because of water. It symbolizes reflection, healing, and continuity. I studied existing vegetation, views, topography, and sunlight to determine the best orientation for the building. The natural landscape became part of the memorial experience instead of just simply serving as a backdrop. On the lower part of this slide, you can see my solar analysis, my view analysis, the street, and the sound analysis coming from both the street and the campus that is to the right of the site. Precedent research. My precedents helped me shape both the emotional and architectural direction of my project. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice demonstrated how architecture can communicate powerful stories through movement, scale, and emotion. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice was made by mass architects, and they do a lot of architecture work for things like memorials and sculptural pieces too. Richard Myers Jubilee Church influenced my understanding of light, using simplicity and geometry and spatial composition in architecture. I also studied sacred architecture to understand how circulation, materiality, and natural light can create meaningful experiences without relying on excessive ornamentation. While the National Memorial influenced the overall experience, Richard Myers Jubilee Church influenced the architecture itself. It taught me how natural light and simple geometric forms and restrained material and a restrained sorry and a restrained material palette can create powerful spiritual spaces without relying on ornamentation. Those ideas shaped my roof's form, my use of white in the spiritual spaces, um, to set them apart from the more secular spaces, and the calm atmosphere of the interior and surrounding area of the memorial in general. Um, the Memorial for Peace and Justice uses a lot of level changing to make you walk through it more slowly, so that um, you really insert yourself into the memorial, and it forces you to go through it more slow, so that you can recognize everything in the memorial. The Jubilee Church uses light through these three big sails that are on the left of it, and those sails represent the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit in the Jubilee Church. And Richard Meyer uses a lot of geometric symbolism and color to tell you what is spiritual and what is secular in the Jubilee Church. And so I used that in my design. I used the more rectilinear form for the middle part of my roof, which doesn't have anything to do with the spiritual aspects of this project. But for all of the sacred spaces, I used a more geometrically divisive roof, and it really was meant to catch the sunlight really well also. So not only is the roof geometrically showing that it's um, spiritual, but also how I'm using the light when it's coming into that roof also shows that. My early concepts explored several building forms before arriving at the final composition. Throughout critiques, I refined the relationship between the memorial spaces and the landscape, simplified the overall form, and strengthened the building circulation. Each iteration brought the architecture closer to my concept of creating a quiet journey from arrival to reflection. Water is the primary design element because it supports both emotional and environmental goals of the project. It symbolizes remembrance, healing, and the passage of time, while creating quiet spaces for reflection. The reflecting pools strengthen the connection between the building and the creek and mirror the surrounding landscape and provide passive cooling to improve outdoor comfort in the Texas heat. Um, my circulation was a lot more, there was a lot more going on in my circulation in my design before I got to my final. And there's a reason for that. It was to really make sure it's focused on the actual experience itself and not just doing a lot of other things for no real reason. The central concept is reverence through journey. The building is organized around a sequence of spaces that gradually transition visitors from public entrance into the increasingly intimate spaces for reflection. Water, framed views, and carefully controlled light reinforce this progression while encouraging movements of pause throughout the experience. These are the two most important parties to my design, light being um, the party on the left that's meant to show how I'm using light in this design, and then the party that I made of the entire building to show that circulation and how everything is organized. The floor plan is organized around clear circulation and distinct program zones. Visitors enter through the lobby before moving into gathering spaces, private reflection areas, and the sacred space overlooking the water. The plan intentionally separates active and contemplative functions while maintaining visual connections across the site. Large openings continually reconnect visitors with nature throughout the building. So, my idea was to, coming from the National Memorial piece, the level changes in that, I decided to add the staircase going down into the ground instead of just having it flat for the entrance to the curved viewing area for my underwater monuments. So in doing that, I made the walls of that glass instead of just having it as like a concrete path, like at ground level, which just separates it from everything else and makes you really walk through it slower and it be kind of its own monument, even in itself. Um, from the floor plan view, you can also see how I used more geometry to separate the sacred spaces and the secular spaces, with the curved windows wrapping around what is sacred and what is not. The sections reveal how the architecture uses changes in height and natural light to create emotional experiences. Lower ceilings to create moments of intimacy, while taller spaces emphasize openness and gathering. The elevations express a restrained material palette that allows proportion, shadow, and texture to become primary architecture elements. Um, in all my designs, I make sure to pay attention to making sure that what is intimate and So all of the bathrooms, their their ceiling is lower, and then for those sacred spaces, because of my use of light and how my roof is made, while I usually would make the roof of the private sacred spaces smaller, paying attention to the light and how I am using it in this specific structure, I decided to keep the ceiling open for those spaces so they could also get that light. Materials. Sustainability was integrated into the design from the beginning. Extended roof overhangs reduce direct solar heat gain while providing shaded outdoor gathering areas. Concrete and stone provide thermal mass, helping stabilize interior temperatures. Large areas of glass maximize daylight and strengthen visual connections to the surrounding landscape, reducing the need for artificial lighting during the day. The rusted iron monuments that poke from the water are symbolic in the same way that the rusted boxes at the National Memorial for Peace are. They represent they represent how memory is not erased but made legible, and loss leaves a mark rather than being smoothed away. The use of white spaces is to make you aware that you are in a spiritual place rather than somewhere that is of the secular world, um, like Richard Meyer uses in the Jubilee Temple. And in the pictures that I show, the top left is the Jubilee Temple, and then the right is my space. And you can see the inspiration I took from the Jubilee Temple and the materials that are used in my space, and also how the light and the roof is contoured. And then for my materials that I took from the Monument of Peace and Justice, the rusting metal really struck me as something very important when I was researching that piece, and I think it fit really well with what this monument is about, remembering those people that are buried in the unmarked graves. And it's very similar, just in thought anyway. So I decided to use that same kind of thought process for these monuments that are rusting, um, for remembrance. The exploded view illustrates how the project is assembled. It shows the relationship between circulation, roof, water, and symbolism, breaking the building into layers, helping explain how architectural ideas are translated into construction while maintaining the project's overall simplicity. Here you can just see how everything is specifically broken up, along with my use of gateways and thresholds. That came strongly from um, my research on Richard Meyer and the Jubilee Church that he designed. Um, the entrance to both the Jubilee Church and my design um, squeeze you into a space, and then once you get to the monument, the actual place you're trying to get to, it really opens up and it creates this moment of happiness and just it elevates your experience when you actually get into the space. Um, I took I sorry. What influenced the gateway that I put in front of the entire monument and building was derived from my research of sacred spaces that are more like temples in a way. It was meant to tell you that you're somewhere important and that you're entering somewhere important, and that maybe you should take a breath before you even start walking up to that threshold that I mentioned before. The way I designed it is meant to reflect the creek that the bodies are buried near and around and under as it dips in over your head. These are my exterior renders. These renderings demonstrate how the building interacts with the landscape throughout the day. The reflecting pools mirror both the architecture and the sky, reinforcing the theme of remembrance. The low horizontal form allows the surrounding trees and water to remain dominant features while the building quietly supports the visitor's experience. I used ceremonial procession to symbolize commemoration and just to make the overall building kind of ceremony like to honor those people. A large arch is there to emphasize the importance of the monument, and catch your attention as you walk through, as I mentioned just before. And here is a really good view, or a couple of really good views of the roof and how the Jubilee Temple inspired me to make a roof that tells you where the spiritual place is and where the secular place is. And I feel like if I hadn't pivoted from my original plan, which was to make that kind of middle piece of the roof, just the whole roof in general, I would have lost a lot of research value that I'm glad I like went back over and checked and made sure I included. These are my interior renders. Inside, the architecture relies on natural light, open views, and simple materials to create a calm atmosphere. The sacred gathering space frames the landscape while encouraging quiet reflection rather than overwhelming visitors with symbolism. The building allows light, proportion, and nature to communicate the emotional experience. And here you can see that level of change again that I used, that was inspired by the National Memorial of Peace and Justice. This is a video of the left portion of the building with those three smaller sacred spaces and how they interact with each other and how they interact with that left wall. Hmm. This is a rendering of the main sacred space, and as I said before, this space really was a reflection of my research of the Jubilee Temple and how I'm using light, geometry, and material to tell you where that you are in the spiritual place. Video showing that space. I like the video a lot. It really shows how the light bounces off the walls and the white of that space and how it kind of just fills up the room coming from the front. Throughout the semester, my understanding of architecture evolved from designing individual spaces to designing meaningful experiences. Research, precedent studies, and critiques, and repeated design iterations all strengthen this project. I have learned how to research and in turn use what I excuse me. I learned how to research and in turn use that research in my own original design. Creekview demonstrates how architecture can preserve memory, encourage reflection, and create places that honor people whose stories have often been overlooked. Thank you. Here's another video of my rendering and the whole project. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.